Hello guys, I'm Debrad and today we're gonna be making this scene. So, I have animated this whole scene inside of OpenToonz and I have recorded while I was animating. So there is a lot of things that we're gonna cover today. So in this advanced animation demonstration, we're gonna be learning how to import an image sequence into OpenToonz, some deformation tricks like using the plastic tool over a frame by frame animation, the use of the powerful sub-X sheet column, the use of cloning sub-X sheet column, use of peg bars while animating, character rigging and animation, using effects inside of OpenToonz such as transparency, glow, matte in Radial Gradient and blending modes like add or screens. And we are also gonna look at how to animate an object by using the motion path. This tutorial is not about the basics of OpenToonz like how to use each and every tools. You've got to know the basics before following this tutorial. By the way, this tutorial is not about learning frame by frame animations. I think you're gonna get a lot of those things in YouTube. So that's why I'm gonna use pre-built smoke and fire animations and I'm gonna import them into our project while animating. And if you want to learn a detailed character rigging inside of OpenToonz, watch my previous tutorial, character rigging in OpenToonz. I wanted to give this animation a digital painting type of looks. So that's why I have chosen to make the scene and the characters all inside of Photoshop. Then I exported them in different layers and imported them in OpenToonz. So let me show you all the layers in Photoshop that I am going to export. So this is the background layer and this is the light layer for the background because there is a fire and the light emanating from the fire is going to reflect on the walls of the cave and illuminate the scene. And the reason why I have made them in separate layers because later on I am going to add a light flickering effect by keyframing the transparency of the light. And this is the stick of the fire which is going to be on top of the fire, and then I have this foreground layer and another layer for the lights that is emanating from the fire and hitting the walls of the foreground layers. And there is two different layers of blast. One is just the illumination, the glow of the blast, and another one for the extra bit of highlights that's gonna appear when the blast happened. So these are the files of the scene layer. And this is our character. For the body of the character we have two separate lights, one from the front and one from the behind. You can see when I turn off the light it kind of look like this. And for the legs again there is two separate lights, one from the front of the leg and one from the behind the leg. And this is the character after the blast. Again for this one too we have two different layers, one for the main body and one for the lights. For the legs too there is a light. So to start the project in OpenToonz, I will import those files one by one and scale them down to match the camera settings, and we will arrange them in the X sheet in right stacking order. We can bring multiple files at a time, and to transform their values we will select the edit tool, and by selecting the scale sub tool we can bring the size down of this layer. By the way, I use shortcuts for most of the tools, so you will not gonna see me picking up each and every tool by mouse click rather than keyboard shortcuts. It's very important to name each and every columns in the X sheet in a proper way. As I have told you earlier, I'm not going to show you how to do frame by frame smoke and fire animations here. I have created them earlier and exported them in a certain folder in my drive. So here I am going to show you how to import an image sequence into OpenToonz. So to import an image sequence, when you open the folder where you have stored your image sequence, one thing you have to remember that the first frame of the sequence does not start with 0. It must have to start with 1. Doesn't matter what number of prefix it uses. But right now, if you want to load the image sequence by selecting the first image and right clicking on it and selecting load, it will not load the sequence at all. What it will do is it will load just that single image file. So how to do it? To do it properly, you need to right click on the first frame and select rename. And by selecting rename, it will already give you the file name without the prefix or those numbers. So now you can just hit rename and you will see that it have created an extra file, in this case called fire final. So now if you right click on that file and click load, you will see in the X sheet the image sequence imported perfectly. Now I will select all the other files and drag them to add some more frames in the X sheet. Now if you hit the play button, you can see how the fire animation actually looks like. And here I will create one more frame at the end of the fire animation to do a little bit trick of mine. So I have created an empty frame here at the end of the fire animation, and I will select the brush tool and I will paint a random region around the fire and I will make it a solid. And then by going to the X sheet, I will select that extra frame, in this case frame number 69, and I will select the plastic tool and apply a plastic mesh in it. Then I will increase the frames of the plastic mesh column to match the entire length of the fire animation. Now we can simply select that extra frame and hit delete, because we are only going to be needed the plastic mesh region. And now we are going to resize and transform the value of the plastic mesh column, which is parented to the fire animation. And now we will adjust the scale and the position of the fire by changing the plastic mesh column's transformation values as it is parented to the fire animation. Now you can see the fire is placed perfectly in the right position. Now going to the effects schematic view, we will add an effects to the fire layer, and under the effects browser, under the light folder, we can find an effects called glow. We will select that effects and insert it, and it have created an effects node called glow, and by double clicking on that particular node we can see all the options of that glow effect. Here we can tweak those effects a little bit to get the desired result. By clicking on the render view, we can see now our fire is glowing. And now the use of the plastic tool, the reason why we have created that plastic mesh. So going back to the plastic tool, in the build skeleton mode, we will start to create different joints. I will add 2 more joints at the bottom of the fire to give some stability at the bottom region. And now we can see by using the plastic tool over the fire animation how we can deform the shape of the fire very smoothly. Here I have created another example of the same use of plastic tool over an animation. I have created this snake animation where the snake is rising up his head. So again, by creating an extra frame at the end of the animation, I will just create simply a solid color boundary around the head of the snake. And now I will divide the snake layer into 2 separate layers, one for the body of the snake and another one for the head. And now by importing that solid head frame into the X sheet, in this case which is number 15, so we can just enter number 15 and it will appear in our X sheet. Then we can use a plastic tool to create plastic mesh around it. So now the snake will appear into this plastic mesh region. Now again we will create some joints by using the build skeleton tool, and we create some extra joints around the neck region. So now we can simply select these joints, and by going to animate mode we can animate them however we want. Now it's not really a perfect example for this kind of animation, but you can get an idea how much we can do using this plastic tool. So now by going to different frames we can add different poses by animating the joints. So this is a very rough example what we can pursue by using this plastic tool over a frame by frame animation. So coming back to our main project, now we need to organize all the columns depending on their relationships in the composition. In this case, this body column associates with 2 more highlight layers. One is the back side and one is in the front side. So to combine these three layers and make them a single layer to make it easier to work with, what we need to do is select these three layers, and by going into the X-sheet menu, select this option called collapse. And what it will do is simply collapse these three different layers, make it a one single layer to work with. Initially, it will give you a warning whether to include relevant pegvars in the subsheet or not. In many cases, I think you are going to choose to include all the pegvars. In this case, we don't have any. So we will just simply hit apply. And as you can see now, there is only one column instead of those three columns, and this column combines all the three columns, so you can select them and transform them as a one single layer. And for the leg layers we will do the same. Also for the legs we have three different layers, one for the main leg and two highlights are coming, one from the behind and one from the front of the leg. So we'll select three of the layers and collapse them to create another subsheet for the leg, and we will rename them as P as pirate, leg, P body. And now by using the plastic tool on the leg layer, we can add a plastic mesh around it. I am going to do the exact same thing to create a run cycle. So I will create a bone type of skeleton system. So in the build skeleton mode, I will create some joints, and you can see how the leg is getting bent when I move the joints. And in this example I would like to use this kind of round bend type of deformation for the animation. By the way, this is not going to be an example for a perfect run cycle. If you want to learn how to do a run cycle animation or a walk cycle animation, I have created a separate tutorial for that earlier, and I have given the link below so you can check it out if you want. This is going to be a very simple cartoony type of run cycle animation. I'm not going to spend too many time for a perfect run cycle here. And when we finish creating the animation cycle for one leg, what we will do is we will select that column and choose this option called clone, sub or X sheet, and it will make a clone of the selected layer. Now we cannot see any difference because the cloned layer is above the previous layer. So what we have to do is here we have to create an offset between those two legs. So to do that, we will simply select the first 13 frames of the subsheet and we will hit delete. Now we will select the whole remaining frames and we will move them to the start of the timeline. And now you can see we have both legs, one in the front and one in the back. So this is how initially our run cycle looks like. Now going into the schematic node view, we will select those two leg layers. We will create a peg node, parent those two legs to the peg node. So now by selecting that peg 1 node, we can move both those two legs as a one layer. So by selecting that peg node, we can move and transform both of the legs. So we'll do a little bit further adjustment like reposition the center and scaling them and repositioning them so the legs matches with the body proportionally. From the function editor view, I will delete all the excess keyframes that I have created during the transformation of the peg layer. By the way, if you don't know how to work in function editor, I am going to make another tutorial for function editor, keyframing and easing. But for now, I think you can find other tutorials on YouTube of how to use function editor. Going back to the X sheet, I'll select the pirate body layer and I will add a plastic mesh in it. Then I will create a very simple bone joint to create a subtle head movement of the character. You can see now if I move the head, the body also deforms with it. So I'll create some more joints in the barrel area so the barrel don't move. One thing to mention here, you could have also used the paint rigid mode. Determine the area that needed to be rigid and the area which is needed to be flex. But in this example, I will just create some extra bones that will do the work for us. Now I will import the showed layer in the X sheet and I will bring down the frames till the end of the timeline. And I will reposition the center and the rotation value and I will do a simple cycle of movement along with the body. Now we can call this peg layer two legs and create a new peg layer and call it P jump or pirate jump. We can parent legs peg node and the body to this new jump peg node. You can see the hierarchy, the parent-child relationship between these different nodes. Another thing is to parent the short layer with the body layer. So now we can select the jump node, and by transforming its position value, we can create our character jump up and down while it's running. Coming to our function editor, we can select the jump peg node, and if we select this n/s, which means north/south values of the position, and by selecting that, we can see that it shows us the values of the keyframe in different frames. So to create a loop in a peg bar, we can simply just select the value of the first keyframe and paste it to frame 14. Now we cannot do this in XSheet like other layers because a peg layer does not appear in XSheet, and I don't know if there is any other way to do it other than using function editor. If you guys know it, please let me know in the comments below. Now to create a loop, we can simply copy the value and paste it again and again till the end of the timeline. I hope there is a simpler way to do this that I don't know. So now we can see our character is jumping up and down while the legs are also moving. I think I have made a mistake here. You can see that the plastic tool is not really working here. And the reason why it's not working is because I have parented the actual body layer with the jump peg layer. What I should have done, I should have connected the mesh layer to the jump peg layer and the body to the mesh layer and the shroud to the body layer. And that will give us the perfect hierarchy for the animation. Now by selecting the joints of the plastic deformation tool, we can add a little bit head movement with the jump of the character. Now I will create another peg layer, call it pirate main layer, and by selecting this peg layer I will add the key positions of the animation. Now this peg node will work as the final positions of the character while it's moving across the scene. So I will create a keyframe at the start of the animation while dragging it to outside of the frame, and I will create another keyframe dragging it all the way to the left, giving the character's final position. Right now it's moving so fast, so I will add some more frames into the timeline. So I will open the subsheet of all the leg layers and the body layers and add some more frames in those subsheet timelines too. So this is how it's look like with the movement of the position. Now I will bring those foreground layers after the pirate character layers, and that's how it's look like. Now I think it's still not right. It's a little bit slow. So by going to the function editor, I will simply cut the value from frame 150 and paste them in frame 120, and that will short the length of the animation. So it might looks confusing to you in the schematic view of OpenToonz. So that's why I am breaking down what is happening here. So here for the legs we have three layers, one for the actual leg and two for the highlights. So we are going to combine these three layers, leg and light 1 and light 2, and how we are going to combine it by using the subsheet option. So let's say we have combined these three layers in a one single layer. Then we have the body, and for the body also we have three layers, one the actual body and two lights, one light from the back and one light from the front of the character. So again we are going to combine these three layers, body and light 1 and light 2, and make a subsheet of them. So we have these two layers to work with. Now in these light layers, light 1 and light 2, we are adding a transparency effect as the intensity of the light goes down while the character moves. For the body layer, the same. For the two light layers, we are going to add the transparency effects in it. Now we are going to clone this leg sublayer to make the second leg. Let's say this is the first leg and we are going to clone it to make a second leg. And these two leg layers are going to be connected with a peg layer which is named two legs. So that's what we have done with the legs, and I have created another peg layer called p body, and we have connected these two legs peg bar and the body subsheet layer into this p body peg bar. And there is another layer which is the short layer, and this is also connected to the peg bar. So this body peg bar is the mother of this all child peg bars. We have three different peg bars connected with it, the body and the legs and the shoulders. So now by transforming this body peg bar, we can transform all the layers. Now this body peg bar is parented with another peg bar, and this is the final peg bar called pirate main layer. So for this main two peg bars, we are going to have two different type of animation into them. For this pirate body peg bar, which is a jump peg bar, we are going to add the jump animation into it. And for the pirate main peg bar, we are going to add the moving animation from left to right. So that's how the whole hierarchy system of the character is working. Now if we open the function editor and select the jump layer and then select the north and south position value, which is in this case the up down position value, and then select this little box which is the function curve window here. Now we can select the top keyframes and move them up to adjust all the top positions of this jumping character animation. So that's why Curve Editor is a very useful tool while adjusting and refining the animation. Now we could have done the animation this way, but here is a little bit extra details that I have added to show you as an example, which is these highlights. One in the front of the leg and another one in the back of the leg. Now I want to fade those lights when the character goes away from the fire. But the thing is, the light appearing in the front of the leg disappear much more quickly when the character just pass by the fire. But the light in the back of the leg stays till it reaches the left corner of our frame. Though in this first moving character, the changes with the light will be very subtle and almost unnoticeable, so I could have just used one highlight layer, which I didn't realize at the beginning of the scene. But I have kept it in the video to give you a demonstration. Now we are going to back up a little bit because of the different keyframes of those two different leg layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break these leg subsheet layers into those three different layers. So we don't need to create separate meshes for each elements of the legs like those highlights. What we can do is duplicate the leg mesh 2 times and use them for all the parts. So after duplicating the plastic mesh, I will replace every one of them after the leg layers. And in the schematic view, we will parent all the 3 layer plastic meshes with the actual layers. The reason why I could not have done it under the subsheet layers, because while I am offsetting those frames, the keyframe values where the highlights disappear also get changed for all the layers, and that's why those highlight fading keyframes will not be at the right keyframes as we need it. So now we will select all the 6 leg layers and duplicate them. So if we reset the schematic view, it's kind of look like this. Now I will create another peg bar and join these new 3 leg layers on that new peg layer and rename it leg 2. And that's how we can get the same result that we were doing by using the sub-X sheet. And we are creating another peg bar which is called leg 1 and pairing them with these 3 layers. And this leg 1 peg bar is connected to this peg bar which is called 2 legs. And now what I am doing is cloning these 3 layers again to create the second leg and creating another peg bar, let's call it leg 2, and we are parenting them with this leg 2 peg bar, and this leg 2 peg bar is again connected to this peg bar which is called 2 legs. Now going back to our function curve window, we can drag these Bezier handles and create some easing at the high points of the animation to make it much more interesting. Now going to the effects schematic view, I will add a new effects to the highlight layers of the legs, and the effects is transparency. So under the layer blending folder, I will select that effect and hit insert. And I will double click in it. By default it gives us the value of 50. In frame 45 I will make the value 0 because in this position I want the light to appear 100%. So the transparency will be 0. Then in frame 65 I will make the transparency value 100% and that will make the light 100% transparent, which means it will disappear like this. And then I will do the same for the other leg too. I will select that light layer and insert the transparency effect in it. And I will do the same thing with the highlight which is in the back of the leg, which I want to stay for a little bit longer. So at frame 65 I will give the transparency value of 0, which means it will be 100% opaque, and at frame 85 I can make it 0 because I don't think in this distance there will be almost no influence of the fire. So after doing this for both of the legs, it kind of look like this. You can see the light is disappearing as the character is going out of the frame. Now by selecting the body layer, and we can right click and select open sub-X sheet, and going into this body layer we can do the same thing with the highlights of the body too. Now it's time to refine the short animation a little bit. You can see I am not keyframing them at exactly in the high point or the low point, but what I am doing is I am creating keyframe at the middle of the two position to give the short follow through movement as it is attached to the body. Now you can see how the short is bouncing with the jump of the character. And now it's time to create the trail of the gunpowder, and to do that I will simply create a brush stroke and then fix it a little bit, and by selecting the pump tool we can give random thickness value here and there. Now what I'm going to do is duplicate the level several times, let's say 6 times, and by using the pump tool I will add some random thickness to it. For each of the frames I'll give them a different thickness by using this pump tool. You can see I am using the onion skin option to get a reference of the previous frame and make it a little bit different than the last one. Now I will select this brush stroke and I duplicate it. To make it more visible, I will give it a different color, let's say bright red for now. Now by selecting this brush stroke, we can give a lower thickness to it. While I was trying to give this gunpowder trail an interesting look, I explored some of these special features in the style editor. And while experimenting with those styles, I discovered something new. I discovered some new styles that will be perfect for this gunpowder. Now we can use this little bubble type of shape. If we zoom out, we can get the kind of gunpowder look that I was looking for. Now I am creating two different layers of this brush stroke, and I will give one of them the highlight color which is similar to the fire color, and I will move the highlight stroke behind the gunpowder stroke, and that will give us this kind of a look. Now by selecting these 6 frames, we can repeat it up to 120 frames or 19 times. Now in the schematic node view, we will select this node and attach it to the P jump peg bar. And now I will simply transform the value, like change the center and move the position right in the hole of the barrel. Now to match the shape of the gunpowder and place it in right position, one easy thing we can do is to use the plastic tool. You can see again I have made a mistake because the plastic mesh is creating at the default position of the layer. So what we can do, we can reset the position of the layer, then apply the plastic mesh in it. And in the schematic, I will parent the plastic mesh of the gunpowder with the jump peg layer, and I will do the same positioning again. Now if we go to the function curve view of the peg jump layer, we can get the curve value of the different key positions of the character, and we can use it as a reference where the keyframes are made, as it doesn't appear in the X sheet. Now I have created this simple joint of the gunpowder trail, and it will make easier to move the position of the gunpowder. You can see I am just simply going one keyframe to another keyframe and matching the position of the gunpowder, and to do that I have created this red line as a guideline. So that's how it looks like. Now to give it a much more irregularity, I am selecting this second frame and pump down the thickness, and by selecting the eraser tool I am going to erase some of the position, and I'll do the same thing in the fifth frame and erase of the middle of the trail. To give some irregularity as the position of the barrel is jumping with the character. And now I will create a line, reposition it to create the gunpowder which is left in the floor. Then I will keyframe the value of the position with the movement of the gunpowder trail. I'll give it a bright color to make it much more visible. Then I will make it a little bit thicker. Then I will create another line and give it right position and thickness. Then again by using the pump tool I will give some irregularity in it. Then the same thing that done with the gunpowder trail, I will create two separate layers, and one of them I will make the highlight and another one the gunpowder. I will use the same color as the trail dropping from the barrel. Now by selecting this gunpowder layer, I will add an effect under the matte folder which is called matte in. I will insert it in the gunpowder layer, and you can see initially the gunpowder disappears. Now I will use this layer as the matte of the gunpowder layer. Now we can turn it on in the X sheet, and we can see that the gunpowder is appearing only in the place where this column 22 layer is visible. So I am using the column 22 layers visibility as a alpha matte or a visibility matte of the gunpowder layer. Now one more thing we can do is by selecting this column 22 layer, we can add another effects in it, which is the blur effect. Now by adding some blur into it, what we can do is we can add a little bit of details in it. It will fade the edge of the alpha matte, which will help us to blend these two gunpowder layers a little bit better. Now I have created this little fire animation earlier, which I have brought into this project, and I will adjust its scaling and position as it will appear from the fire. Now going into the effect schematic, I will add a glow into it with a little bit of brightness and little bit of blur and a little bit of adjustment with the color. So it's a very simple animation here. This little fire is catching the gunpowder and following the trail, it's going towards the pirate. Here as the fire moves, the gunpowder will also disappear with the fire. So I'll do the same thing by selecting this matte line layer. I'll animate the position of it as the fire moves, and that will make disappear the gunpowder as the fire moves out. And now I will import the explosion. What I have done here to reduce the time of this project, I have composed few explosion animation in After Effects and add a glow into it already. And I have made them with a solid background because I have noticed while importing transparent layers, OpenToonz have some anti-aliasing issues. Now what can we do is, at first we will scale down the value to match the camera settings of the scene. Then we can add a layer blending effect into it, which is screen. So by giving it a screen mode, only light parts of the layer will be appear and all the darks will disappear. So that's how we can get the desired result. Now you can see we have an extra blast light layer which I have made in Photoshop. It will give some extra glow and reflective lights in the walls of the cave. To make it a little bit more interesting, I will import a fire spark animation, which I will add before the explosion, which will give us a little bit of anticipation. So again, I will reposition the layer and insert the screen blending mode into it. Then I will bring down the explosion after the fire spark. Then again I will add some more frames for the background and the foreground layers, and it's kind of look like this. Now we are going to work with the blast light layer created in Photoshop. So at first I will delete all the frames at the beginning because we will gonna be needed it exactly when the blast happens. So we can just delete these unnecessary frames. So again we will insert a transparency effects into it. It will be visible only when the blast happens. So I will keyframe the intensity of the transparency based on the intensity of the blast animation. So here in the middle it will be 0% transparent, and then at the start the transparency will be 100%, which will make it disappear, and the same thing at the end. So going back to the function editor, we can see how it's look like. It starts with 100, comes back to 0, and from 197 frame the value is going back to 100%. So now add some irregularity to it. In frame 192 we can bring down the intensity a little bit, like 70. Now it's kind of look like this. Now going back to the function editor, I will select all the keyframes and copy them, and select this foreground blast layer and insert a transparency effects into it. And then going back to the function editor, we will select this new transparency effect and paste the same value into it. You can see on the left side, these are the extra highlights that I have made, which will be appear during the time of the blast. It will give some extra bit of realism into the scene. Now the hat animation. So we'll bring the hat file into our project, and we'll bring it down when the blast started to disappear. We'll rename it. To animate it, we'll select it from the node schematic view and add a path into it. We'll select the hat node and add a motion path node into it. Now if we select the brush tool, we can create a motion path which I want the hat to follow. We can simply draw the motion path when it finished, OpenToonz is going to ask me that I want to use this motion path or not. So after hitting yes, we can do further refining on the motion path by selecting the control point editor tool. Then if you select the hat layer, you can see while I am moving the hat layer in the frame, it only snaps to the motion path that we have created. And in the tools option window, there is an extra value which is called position, and it changes from 0 to 100%. So what we can do now is at the start we can set a keyframe, and at the last keyframe we can bring the hat at the end of the motion path. So initially you can see how it's look like. The hat is following the motion path. Now it's a little bit faster, so I'm going to add some more frames and bring down the keyframe at the end. So now all I have to do to adjust the rotation of the hat according to the motion path that it follows. Now to give it a little bit more details, going to the effect schematic view, I will insert a new effect called Radial Gradient. And you can see it creates a new column in the X sheet called Radial Gradient 01. If you select this column, you can see it creates a circle in camera view, which is going to guide us as the influence of the gradient. Now I will reposition the gradient on top of the fire, and I will give it a color which is going to imitate the light of the fire, and I will expand the outer region of the gradient. Now the reason why I have added this gradient is I want to add a light influence of the fire on the hat. Now by selecting the gradient node, I will insert a matte in effect. And the gradient will be the source of the matte effect, and the hat layer will be the matte. By doing that, what is going to happen is the radial gradient will only appear inside the hat, as the hat is also working as a matte of the gradient layer. Now for the gradient layer, I will insert a blending mode which is add. By adding this light blending mode to the gradient, you can see the change. Now it looks like it's the influence of the light of the fire. You can see the difference with or without the gradient light. Now you can see when the hat is coming, it has no effect of the light surrounding the scene. That's because the hat layer is on top of those light layers. So what I have to do is bring the hair behind the light layer. So you can see now the hat is also influenced by the light of the blast. I want to add some flickering on the lights of the hat, because as the light is moving, there are also going to be some movement in the light. So to do that, I have added a transparency effect into the radial gradient layer, and I am going to open that effect from subsheet, and I am going to add some keyframes, and let's say from frame 250 I am going to change the value randomly so that the influence of the light changes throughout the time. You can see now how the light is affecting the hat. So again, going to the X sheet, I am going to select this animation of the transparency effect. I am going to select them and copy them. Now going to the X sheet, you can see we have this layer called BG light or background light, which is simply the influence of the fire on the walls of the cave. Now I will insert a transparency effects into it. By changing the intensity of this layer, we can give the impression of light hitting on the wall. Now we want to add some flickering or some irregularity in this light as the fire is moving. So I will select this new transparency layer from the function editor and I will simply paste the flickering value into it. You can see now how the fire is flickering on the wall. So I will simply copy this value and paste it again and again to cover the entire length of the timeline. Now I will do the same thing with other light layers too, like this foreground light layer. And again I will see the transparency value from the function editor and I will simply paste all the keyframes. I'm not going to paste it from frame 1. I will offset it by some frames. Now you can see the different wiggling value of the lights. You can see we have made a mistake here, which is the sticks of the fire is appearing in front of the smoke of the blast. So we need it to move behind the blast layer. So we'll just simply fix that by dragging it, put it behind the blast layer. Now it's time to animate the sad-faced character after the explosion. Here at first I have added the same light flickering thing by using the transparency effects. I have sculpted this whole part as it's the same thing over and over again. And after doing that, I will collapse both of the leg layers and also do the same for the body layer. Then I will add the plastic tool deformation in it and do the work cycle animation as we have done earlier. Then the same thing, I will clone the leg layer and offset it to make a run cycle. Then I will select all the layer for the body and again collapse them to make a sub X sheet for the body. Then I will open the sub X sheet and do further adjustment so the character stops after stepping 1 or 2 steps. I'll just add a little bit of hand movement here. Now here is something different. Last time we have created a peg bar to parent the leg layers and the body layers. But this time let's do something different that we can do in this kind of scenario. This character have two leg layers. One is actual leg layer and the second one is the light layer. There is only one light here instead of two lights. And for the body also there is one layer for the body and another layer for the lights. In this case there will not be two different lights, there is only one light. So let me erase this second light. And for the body also there is one light. The transparency effect added in these light layers to give this flickering light effect on the character's body and legs. And there is another layer which is the hand layer, because the hand is going to move a little bit. And now we are going to combine these two layers, leg and light one, and make them one subsheet layer. Let's call it leg. And now we are going to clone this subsheet layer by making the second leg layer, and we are going to combine these two body layers and call it body subsheet layer. Now what I have done is, instead of creating peg bars and parenting them, I am combining these two leg subsheet layers into one subsheet column, which is going to be the legs. And now to animate the whole character, I am combining all of these subsheet columns into one subsheet column, which is going to be the main sub X sheet column. I will select the leg layers and the body layers and collapse them one more time. Again, this is like nesting compositions. After making this new sub X sheet, the whole pirate animation collapsed into one layer. Now what we can do is we can transform the values of this particular layer, or even we can add different type of effects or deformation tools in it, like plastic tools and all. And by adjusting its transformation values such as center and the position, we can move the character as the character walks into the scene. So I have shown you two different type of methods of rigging, or you can say parenting the layers. Now where you are going to choose which method while animating is depends on what you need in your animation. But let me show you what you can or cannot do with these two different type of methods. Now if you work with these sub X-sheet columns, what you can do with them is you can animate a sub X-sheet column. You can even deform them like using plastic tool and all. You can add effects to them and you can clone them. So if you want to do these things with your column, then you can combine all the layers and use a sub X-sheet column. But the problems with using the sub X-sheet is you have to open and close each and every time you use a sub X-sheet column. And in the X-sheet view, there will be only one column to work with. You're not going to have all the columns side by side and animate them. You're going to have only one main X-sheet column. And for this type of method, by using the peg bar, what you can do, you can only transform a peg bar. You cannot add any effects or you cannot deform a peg bar, and also a peg bar does not appear on the X-sheet, so you have to animate them from the function editor window. But the good thing about using peg bar parenting is you're gonna have all the columns in your X-sheet, so you can see all the keyframes where you are animating for all the layers. So these are the pros and the cons of using these two different type of methods. Well, so finally this is it. I hope you guys learned something valuable today. Please leave your reviews in the comment. Please subscribe and share this video if you like. Thanks for watching.